Okay, we're looking at our depth study in preparation for our paper for Germany 1918 to 1945. And this is just a brief overview. Okay, first of all, the first section we look at is, was the Weimar Republic doomed from the start? It's the first of the three sections we look at. And obviously, the Weimar Republic has many, many early problems it has to deal with, and in its infant years, it doesn't necessarily look like it will survive. One of the big problems it has is the circumstances of the Weimar Republic coming into power. Remember, the Allies refused to negotiate with the Kaiser. There's the Karl Mutiny, the Kaiser abdicates and flees, and the Weimar Republic, mostly made up of the Social Democratic Party, take power and sign an armistice almost right away. So they've inherited a country near economic collapse and threatened by invasion by the Allies unless they negotiate. And the Weimar Constitution is very forward-thinking. It's very democratic. But it does lead to problems. Of course, there is freedom of religion. Women over 20 can vote. There is freedom of speech. It's very forward-thinking. One of the big problems ends up being proportional representation. Basically, it's the idea that the exact number of votes translates into seats in the Reichstag, so everyone is equally and fairly represented. The problem is you get lots of small parties splitting the vote, and no one can have a majority, thus making decisions in the Reichstag. In the first Reichstag election, there are 20 parties that split the vote. So this is a big, big problem. And because of this problem, it has to have Article 48, which means the president, in times of emergency, can completely bypass the Reichstag and the democratic process and act as he sees fit. And President Eber has to use this 126 times, and it shows that the proportional representation is just not efficient for solving problems. And of course, in June 1919, the Treaty of Versailles is signed. And, this is met with outrage in Germany. Of course, the Weimar Republic don't have a choice. It's a diktat, and they're faced with invasion if they don't sign it. But it leads to even more problems for the Weimar Republic. The most obvious one is with reparations. Even though the fee's not agreed yet, it's only agreed in May 1921, they have to pay a huge amount of reparations, and Germany is economically crippled at this point. Their people are starving, and it is just seen as an unnecessary and unfeasible burden. The other big problem that the Weimar Republic faces is they're seen as criminals, as betraying Germany for signing this. The November criminals refers to those who signed the armistice, leading the way for the Treaty of Versailles. And it's a big problem that Hitler later capitalizes on, the idea that Germany was betrayed, that Germany didn't lose the war, but the Weimar Republic and the communists and the Jews stabbed the true Germans in the back. And it's a big, big problem for the Weimar Republic. And almost straight away, they face real opposition. And the first is, of course, the Spartacist uprising, which happens in January 1919, so actually happens before the Treaty of Versailles is signed, and that, in a way, says everything, that even before the treaty is signed, they're facing rebellion. They attempt to start a communist regime in Germany, and it's put down by the Freikorps. So the left wing, the Spartacists, are brutally crushed by the right wing, the Freikorps, ex-soldiers. And this is worrying because the Freikorps shouldn't have to do that. The government should put it down. This later leads to the Kapp's Putsch in March 1920, where this time the Freikorps, with Wolfgang Kapp, managed to take over Berlin. The army doesn't intervene. Ludendorff even sends his best wishes, and it's only stopped because the workers of Berlin all go on strike, and so Berlin is left without water or electricity, and the putsch fails. But it's very, very worrying. And this leads to even greater problems in 1923, the year of real crisis for the Weimar Republic. So Germany can't pay its reparations, so Belgium and France occupy the Ruhr and they start taking materials back to their countries. This is in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, but it's still allowed. And so the Weimar Republic orders passive resistance, especially after 100 striking workers are killed early on. However, they promise that they will still pay the workers who are striking. Of course, the Ruhr is the main industrial heartland of Germany. So to do this, they print lots of money, which is very, very silly because this leads to hyperinflation. And you have cases of Germans burning piles of money because it's cheaper than buying wood to burn in order to cook. And it spirals out of control to epic proportions. And, Weimar Republic's on the state of collapse. Hitler sees this and tries to capitalize with the Munich Putsch. Tries to seize power. He thinks the German people will rise up with him. It doesn't happen. He is arrested. He gets a lenient sentence because the judge is a right-wing sympathizer. And while he's in jail, he writes Mein Kampf and actually becomes infamous because of this episode. But still, he's failed in his initial attempt to gain power. So 1923 is a year of very serious crisis for the Weimar Republic. And one of the other questions we have to ask is, do they recover after 1923? And if we're talking about any recovery of the Weimar Republic, largely we're talking about the work of one man, who later goes on to win the Nobel Prize, Gustav Stresemann. And even though he's only actually the Chancellor for about 6 months, he is working unofficially as the spokesman for the Weimar Republic, and he does a number of impressive things. The first thing he does is deals with inflation. He recalls the currency and introduces the Rentenmark, which is successful. He signs the DAWES plan with America, which means that he gets huge American loans, which he can use to pay off reparations, and he actually is receiving more money from America than he's paying out. So it stabilizes the economy and gives Germany a cash injection that they desperately need. He also signs the Locarno Treaty in 1925, and the Locarno Treaty accepts the Treaty of Versailles, it accepts the borders of the new countries, and says that any future conflict will be settled diplomatically. Stalin's very unhappy about this because it doesn't refer to the eastern borders, and he thinks this is an early sign of the West trying to push Germany east. But because of the success of the Locarno Treaty, Germany is allowed in 1926 to enter the League of Nations. So Germany is no longer in the international wilderness economically. It is more stable. And generally, this is seen as a good time. This is what we know as the Golden 20s, especially in the big cities like Berlin, where you have this money and it becomes a cultural capital. You have lots of expressionism, minimalism. You have artists like Otto Dix. You have famous actresses like Marlene Dietrich. And it seems like Germany is the place to be. Unfortunately, it also leads to a lot of problems, and a lot of people aren't happy at what's going on. One of the accusations is that Germany is facing moral degradation. You have really big problems with prostitution, with alcoholism, with drug abuse, with crime, and lots of people think Germany has lost its moral compass, that it's been influenced by the Americans, and people like the Van der Vogel, the very traditional German cultural enthusiasts, feel that Germany is losing its identity, and Hitler really capitalizes on this later when he is trying to get into power. And the biggest problem is that all this recovery is based on American loans and the idea that Germany is dancing on a volcano, it's having great fun, but this volcano could erupt at any moment. And obviously, this is what happens with the Wall Street crash, and America calls back its loans. The Young's Plan is signed just before the Wall Street crash, so it has nearly no effect. And so the Weimar Republic is in real crisis. And now we're going to talk about our next point. Why was Hitler able to dominate Germany by 1934? And it very much links in with what we were just talking about the Depression and the Wall Street crash. So the first thing Hitler does is he grows the Nazi Party. It's founded in 1919 by Anton Drexler, but Hitler modernizes it. One of the key things he does is really employs the use of propaganda, largely anti-communist, largely anti-Semitic, and he's very successful at this in his early days, in convincing people that the Germans need tough action. The Nazis will give it to him. Failing that, he has more literal means. He has the SA, the Socialist Army, which go around beating up communists and intimidating people, and they very quickly become a very powerful force. And so Hitler uses these two methods to grow the Nazi Party, but as we see, if we look at their Reichstag results, in 1928 they only get 12 seats in the Reichstag, and this is before the Depression happens. So as we can see, there's a clear cutoff point. After that, July 1932, they grow to 230 seats, then larger and larger until they have a majority with Hitler as Chancellor. So clearly, despite Hitler's best attempts and Hitler's charisma and public speaking, probably the key reason, at least in the early days, why Hitler is able to come to power is the Depression. Because before the Depression, the Weimar Republic was relatively stable. It was a fairly superficial recovery, but it was a recovery nonetheless. But the Depression is something that the Weimar Republic is unable to deal with. It is not equipped to deal with such an economic crisis. And it's worth noting that, in general, not many countries do deal with the Great Depression very well. They struggle, the democratic countries, or they become aggressive and expand, like Japan and Italy. So, the political meddling of the Weimar Republic is also another factor. By 1932, the Weimar Republic is extremely unpopular. Chancellor Brüning has failed to deal with the Depression. They don't know what to do. They don't have a majority in the Reichstag. They lack popular support from the people. So Hindenburg changes chancellors. You have von Papen, you have von Schleicher. There is meddling, there is infighting, and eventually Hindenburg is persuaded by von Papen to appoint Hitler because Hitler is popular, he's charismatic, so Germany can have public support at last. Remember that Hindenburg can remove Hitler because Hindenburg is the president has the power to remove chancellors, but it's felt that the Weimar Republic needs someone who is popular and will gain support of the people. And it shows the weaknesses in things like proportional representation in the Weimar Constitution, that at this time of crisis they need to resort to somebody like Hitler. And once Hitler becomes Chancellor in January 1933, he still has a lot of work to do. The Chancellor is by no means a dictator, so he's very, very lucky. One of the first things that happens is the Reichstag burns down, and the fire is actually set by a Dutch-born communist. It's not set by Hitler, but Hitler can barely believe his luck because this enables him to pass the emergency decree. He convinces the Reichstag that Germany is under threat, and the emergency decree means Hitler can arrest anybody who is seen as a potential threat. They can be imprisoned indefinitely without evidence, similar to the Patriot Act in America, and he uses this to round up communists and any political dissidents. So because of this, he now has a majority in the Reichstag. Now he can pass the Enabling Act, which means he does not need to go through the Reichstag in order to pass laws. He can bypass it. And at this point, really, democracy in Germany is over because Hitler doesn't have to refer to the Reichstag in order to pass act. One of the first things he does is he bans trade unions. They are left-wing, they are powerful. He says all German workers have to join the DAF. They are not allowed to go on strike. They're not allowed to complain about pay or conditions. And this removes a major obstacle he has: trade unions. And so, as we see, systematically, he gets rid of all his opposition. He then passes the One-State Party Act, which means that the Nazi Party is the only party in Germany, and the Concordat, which means that the German church will not interfere politically and criticize Hitler, and in return, Hitler will leave the German church alone. He won't interfere with doctrine or religion. And it's obviously very convenient for both the church and the Nazis. Then, in 1934, he decides that the SA is grown too powerful, that Ernest Röhm cannot be trusted, so he launches the Night of the Long Knives, where the SS purges the SA. 4,000 are killed, thousands more arrested. Those that aren't arrested are allowed to join the SS, and so he's removed probably his last threat to his power, the last chance of a coup. And obviously, in August 1934, Hindenburg dies, and Hitler declares himself Führer. So he declares himself both president and chancellor, and Führer literally means emperor in German. So from now on, he is in absolute power of Germany. There is no one, either politically or militarily, that can challenge him. And so now we move on to our third chapter, the Nazi regime. So we've seen the Weimar Republic, we've seen how Hitler comes to power. Now we see what was life like in the Nazi regime. And a huge part of the Nazi regime was all about control, about controlling the people in Germany. How do they do this? Well, examples like the KDF, Strength Through Joy movement, the idea that the Nazi party controlled what German people did in their spare time, and they would be encouraged to see films that were propaganda films. They would be encouraged to buy Volkswagens. They'd be encouraged to go camping in the country, traditional German activities. And it's a very big form of control. There's, of course, the indoctrination that happens in the schools. You have subjects are changed. There is an emphasis on biology, where they learn about Aryan superiority, history, where they learn about great German victories. In science, they learn about how Jews are biologically different. There's an emphasis on sports because Hitler wanted a martial race. There is control of the media. There's also the Gestapo, the SS, and any potential dissident was sent away to a concentration camp. There were informers. Children were encouraged to inform on their parents if they were heard saying things that were bad. And all of these points together, the media control, the Gestapo, lead to the question, firstly, what opposition is there? And the answer is very little. There are some youth movements. There's the Edelweiss Pirate, there's the Navajos, there are the swing movement, and Hitler deals with them in more and more harsh ways as the war progresses. There are some Protestant bishops that speak out, and there's the July bomb plot. But largely, the question, is Germany totalitarian? Well, Hitler doesn't have full control over the economy. There is still an element of free market capitalism, and he doesn't control religious doctrine. But apart from that, really, in every aspect, Germany is a totalitarian state. So, Hitler has almost absolute control. And another big aspect of this control is how Germany deals with its minorities and persecution. And Hitler makes it very clear that the people to blame for Germany's previous downfalls are Untermensch, are subhuman, and they are Jews, they are the disabled, they are homosexuals, they are anyone who doesn't fit his Aryan stereotype. And it starts with small anti-Semitic changes and laws, and this leads up gradually into 1935 and the Nuremberg laws, which means that Jews are not allowed to marry Aryan Germans. Jews are not allowed to have offspring with Aryan Germans because Hitler did not want the Aryan German bloodline to be diluted. This leads to things like Christian lust, and eventually the final solution in January 1942, where Germany moves from having concentration camps like Dachau to extermination camps like Auschwitz, and 6 million Jews and other Untermensch are killed by the Nazis. There's the role of women to consider. They are encouraged to cook, to go to church, and have children. They are not encouraged to have careers as they were in the Weimar Republic. They're given medals for having a large number of children. Hitler wanted to raise the birth rate, and he had a very traditional role for women to be at home and raise the family. And even during World War II, women are not employed in large numbers in German factories, unlike every other country that fought in World War II. So women had a very traditional role. Is he successful in this? Largely he is, and there is not a huge amount of opposition from the women in Germany to this sudden change from the progressive politics of the Weimar Constitution, where they were not just encouraged to vote, but they were encouraged to have careers and be lawyers and doctors and judges. So that is a big part of Hitler's dream society. And Germany during World War II is something we need to look at. How does life change in Germany during World War II? And of course, the Second World War starts off very well for the Germans. They have huge successes in 1939 and 1940. 1941, they invade Russia, Operation Barbarossa. And from sort of 1942 onwards, the war begins to turn against Germany and things get much worse for Germans, culminating in things like the bombing of Dresden, where hundreds of thousands of Germans are killed. And Germany starts off with the idea of autarky, of self-sufficiency in their economy, and this changes in 1942 to war economy, where everything that is potentially vital for the war effort is used, and cinemas shut down unless to show newsreels from the front. There is very strict rationing. Rationing starts in 1939, and by 1945, Germany again is starving and people are dying.